Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome to episode number 111 of the White Knuckle Podcast, powered by Ozonics. Undetectable, undeniable. Sound check.
The Human Torch could not get a bank loan. How does that sound?
Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome to the White Knuckle Podcast. Tonight, I'm having a hard time keeping it together. It's probably due in part to the company I keep. But on the other lines, via Skype, we have none other than the world-famous Dr. Clint Mccoy. And on the other line...
What's up, guys?
On the other line, I have probably even more world-famous Wes Delks from Real World Wildlife Products. How's it going, guys?
Now, wait a minute.
Okay, go. What?
No one from Hidalgo can be more famous than someone from Palestine, okay?
Well, I'm from Indiana,
Not
but I'm not claiming to be from Hidalgo. Good to be here, Jason.
Likewise. So, before I halted the direction of the conversation just for the sake of recording it, let's rejoin. What about Grandma or Grandmama? What's going on?
Oh, Clint's got he's got a doe I was checking out pictures of that apparently he's got an antlered doe on camera, and I was just asking him about that.
We're gonna try and see if it's a doe. Like it's one of the weirdest things I've ever got on trail camera, and I had some history. I got a photo of this deer in like 15 in the dead of winter, and it had these little clumps around its bases where its antlers are, and they were covered in velvet, like two little spike antennas coming out of there. I'm like, that's weird. And I saw her last the following year, and she actually had she was hanging out with does and fawns that summer and had the same, like nothing had changed. And I've got tons of photos of her in, like, obviously after velvet shed in November, December and stuff. And I'm almost positive it's a doe with antlers or like a hermaphrodite or something weird, a buck that's injured himself or something. Something's weird about it, but it looks visibly like a doe body condition wise. And I lost track of her last season, and like she's blipped off the radar, and now she's back. I just got some summer photos of her again, and her rack or its rack hasn't changed at all, but it looks ancient. Like I don't know how old this thing is, but we're about to find out, or at least I'd like to anyway.
I'm confident the deer hunter DMV will figure it out.
No, it's not going to happen. I've never tried to target a mature doe. I don't know what I'm doing. They bust me about every 30 minutes from the tree.
Yeah.
Deer hunter, DVM.
We'll find out.
Right.
We'll find out.
Well, hey, the reason that we all got together tonight, or that I got you two corralled at least for the time being, let's talk about what we got together for before this thing goes completely off the rails, and that is what in the world, what in the world are we gonna do? In Wisconsin, I'm sure it's a little bit different than the conditions that you guys are dealing with, but we've got a screwed up year here, and with respect to weather and growing seasons and things of that nature. I was just out on a farm today walking it that a guy wants to list, and the beans were 3.5 inches tall. That's not good. What do you guys think that turns our seasons into? Or how do you think it changes our season? Don't fight over who goes first, for heaven's sake.
I'll let Wes go. He knows more than I do.
Well, no, I'll take first crack at it, Jason, but I'm confident from the guy that's willing to adapt a little bit. There's a lot of opportunities for not just food plotters, but deer hunters as well. Just for an example, I've got permission to raise a field that was a wheat field, and because of how wet the year was, it never got double cropped. And I talked with the guy that owns the field, and he's perfectly fine. I mean, this is over 20 acres of field, and he's like, yeah, you can plant whatever you want to. And he's just looking at my food plot as a cover crop, and now I've got the opportunity to plant as big a harvest salad plot I want on this acreage. And that's just one example of, hey, it's a tough year for farmers, but let's use it to take advantage of the opportunity as hunters.
Right on.
Yeah, I'm totally on board with you too, Wesley. I'm actually sitting over a patch right now. I can see a double crop bean field that didn't get planted. And I asked the landowner, hey, they plan on planting some cover crop in there anyway later. I said, hey man, do you care if I run some, like harvest salad or something up against the edges right there? He said, go for it. It's, useless to me. Yep. I even offered to pay him just a little bit to be able to throw it in, and he was like, just put something in there. I don't care. He was very open to that. And I think you're right on point here. This growing season has been odd for farmers and food plotters, and those deer hunters that can learn to adapt with the difference in the stages of maturity where crops are at now are going to be the ones that kill early in October.
Yep. It's been a really rough soybean year for food plotters, but I think there's going to be more full plots than normal. And I mean, for a guy that's willing to, talk with some farmers, make some connections, there's opportunity to plant more acres than there ever has been before.
Well, I couldn't agree with
this. Go ahead, Jason. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, let me ask you this, Wesley. I planted, I had about 8 acres worth of real world, those Gentoo beans sitting, and literally every single time I thought about getting it out this year, I had absolutely weather conditions for it. And I'm glad we didn't plant it because they would have been ruined. So we hammered those things into the ground 2 weekends ago when it was real hot, and we literally got the equipment put back up into the shed, and here come 3 inches of rain just beating the ever-living crap out of that ground. And in about 5 days, it looked like a parking lot out there, hard as a brick on top, just awful. And so we dug up some beans, and you could tell they were struggling to come through, but they were all still alive. We run a rotary hoe over the top of it real lightly just to break the crust. And I'm interested to see what those do with that aeration, essentially. And I'm no farmer. My dad is, and he said, go try it. That's, it'll bust that crust up there. And before I leave tomorrow, I'm going to go out there and see what that's done. We busted that up a few days ago, and we'll see if they're popping through yet. I'm sure they will. We got another little shower on top of it, maybe 1/4 of an inch right after we did that. Should bring them up, but that's more of that adaptability. Are you seeing guys having to do that with their plots this year?
Well, because of as many late plantings as there was, and getting stories just like yourself, there was guys that planted in the beginning of the summer, and they planted deep, and then we got a lot of rain, we got some crusting, and they had a hard time coming up, and then they broadcast into those beans, and then in some cases the water just shut off, and because the beans weren't deep enough when they broadcast into that weak stand, then they're not getting moisture. So depending on moisture, that kind of dictates where your seed needs to be in the soil profile. So, there is definitely, like you said, there's a lot of, pretty spotty looking food plots out there. My only advice there is what we can possibly do is, let's get some greens into those food plots. That's the one thing I know I'll be doing, broadcasting some oats or some kind of cereal grains like harvest salad into those plots before a full rain, and get something green in there with our struggling soybeans.
So do you think that it's going to be. Let me back up and just say, I think that you're either going to look like a complete rock star this year with your food plots, or it's going to be a total disaster. I don't think there's going to be a whole lot of in between. Would you agree with that, either of you? No.
I know what mine would look like if I would have planted them early. They would have looked like everything else that we're seeing out here in to use the phrase, the real world. I'm sitting over a bean field right now as we speak, looking over at the farmer, and there's mare's tail and all kinds of foxtail and just junk growing up in his weeds because he didn't get it sprayed proper. And our food plotting is going to mirror exactly what's going on in the ag crop around here, I feel like.
I think there's room for good looking food plots. I mean, a lot of it just depends on the fall weather we get here coming up.
Yeah. Wesley, let me ask you this. When it comes to those, what I would call add-ons to the food plot, walk me through that, your process. When do you decide to throw an add-on and broadcast over the top of beans? Is it when you only get a spotty stand, or say you've got a great looking set of early beans and they're coming up in nice little rows right now? When do you decide to try that, and what time of year should you try that? Because I think a lot of guys that do try that try it either way too early or way too late.
I think a lot of people love the idea of having greens and grains in the same plot, and so they go out and try and overseed into it, but they aren't successful at it because, like you said, they don't know when to do it. And you have to do it when sunlight can get to that seedling that just emerged. And what I mean by that is if your soybean stand is thick enough that the leaves are canopying and you broadcast your seed, it germinates, but then that seedling's trying to grow and can't get any sunlight, then that plant can't take off like it needs to. So there has to be sunlight getting to the ground. And that either happens because your stand is thin from either over browsing or poor planting conditions or whatever it might be, or because the leaves are falling off. And I mean, depending on when you planted and how the weather we get, I mean, that might be mid-September. I mean, whenever leaves start yellowing and falling off, and depending on what the variety of beans you planted as well. So just the key there is making sure that sunlight's getting to the ground.
Right.
Any
recommendations on what you should be throwing in there? As far as your add-on seed, give me an idea on what that consists of.
Some people, I mean, it's really personal preference. Some people like having brassicas like our plot topper mix, and some people like a cereal grain mixture. Our harvest salad's got 3 different cereal grains. I've got a plot behind my house that's a pretty weak stand, and I mean, I personally will probably just plant just our straight real world oats into it. Oats are really easy to germinate. I mean, I like them. I mean, you can't go wrong with oats.
So are you saying that oats would be easier to plant and get to grow on a hard to plant surface to begin with?
Oats are just really easy to germinate. I mean, if you get a rain and some sunlight, I mean, they're just a species that doesn't take much for a food plotter to make them look good, to have a green food source there. There's some other species that some companies might advertise as throw and grow or products like that, but just straight oats, the real world oats. I mean, we know they're attractive. It's not a species that's there just to be green. It's a species that, I mean, whitetails love, and I mean, like I said, easy to grow.
Do you think a lot of people...
I'll second that.
Do you think a lot of people, Wes, get into the the thought process that they have to plant turnips, because everybody that you talk to, and I'm out there now every day talking with guys that hunt, or we're talking hunting land, and they're like, I'm going to get my turnips in, and I just wonder, and I honestly, I think I know the answer to the question, but I'd like to hear it from a professional. Do a lot of people get lulled to sleep, so to speak, just thinking that's their only option when really they should be considering else? And if they should be considering something else, why should they consider something else?
Well, I'm certainly not an expert. I'm always learning, but I'd be curious to get your guys' opinion on how brassicas and turnips have turned out for you guys. But certainly, just based on our customer base, it seems like brassicas, like our plot topper, get planted more in northern states. Seems like people just have more luck with them. That deer, for whatever reason, hit them harder. I'm not sure if that has to do with when people plant in the frost states. When it comes to brassica species, I mean, when you plant them and then when you get that frost date, certainly affects the palatability or the attractiveness of those species that they're going after the bulb. I've talked with a lot of people that said, man, I just didn't really feel like they hit my brassicas. And then other people just said they hammered them. And I've had that same experience on different farms of my own. So I like cereal grains. I think that I've never seen a deer that wouldn't eat cereal grains. So whether you're testing a cereal grain or you're testing brassicas or whatever you're testing, I mean, I think it always pays off to be trying different stuff and figuring out, I mean, what works best on your farm.
Is that why the Deadly Dozen is so popular?
I think so. I mean, I think people, if you got 12 different species that, peak in palatability at different times of the season,
right.
You just, for a food plotter, it's a guaranteed there's going to be something in there that's attractive.
It's going to...
I had good luck over, just to iterate, I had last year was the first time I tried that Deadly Dozen on our place, and we've got a family dairy farm here that's got a lot of diverse ag. There's clover and there's alfalfa, a lot of it there. And I went in and planted some of that harvest salad right just a pinch after Labor Day. It wasn't none too early. And it worked out as a great winter food source for us with very little work and input. And matter of fact, one of our nephew shot his first doe over it in his life.
Awesome.
We were stoked about it, Yeah, it turned out great for us. But it was I feel like guys make the mistake of putting, and correct me if I'm wrong here, because I don't really know, but the earlier you get those in the summer, like I've seen guys planting like brassica species like now, 1st of August, and that just to me seems like you're going to get that plant super mature, and the TDN of that plant by the time first frost hits is going to be way less palatable than one you plant in September or early September, mid-September. Is that correct?
Yep, definitely. Particularly where we're at here in Southern Illinois, somebody that's in Wisconsin or Minnesota or a northern state might be able to get away with it, particularly if they get an earlier frost date than normal. I've got plenty of people that I've been on the phone with here in the past week that have just been itching to plant brassica species, and I would venture to say that there'd be a lot of people in northern states that plant here in the next week.
That I'll be one of those guys. I just I'm just not sure whether I'm going to plant just plot topper or harvest salad and plot topper, which is the Deadly Dozen. I'm not sure what I'm going to do yet, and I guess I'll flip a coin. I'm going to Deer Fest this weekend. I've got to be there all weekend, and Scott from Extreme Custom Food Plots I'll just buy whatever he's got.
Yep.
Maybe
get a harvest salad and plot topper, and instead of mixing them, put them side by side and let the deer do the talking.
Hey, there's a good idea. So what?
Yeah, we actually did that, Wesley, with our Gen 2 beans. this year, and again, we planted them super late as far as bean species go, but it was kind of by force and design. But we still had some standard field beans in the drill from our double cropping here on the farm, and we run the drill dry down a 5-acre plot up against the timber, and we then put our Gen 2 beans right beside those things. So we're going to do a little. I love doing that. I think it's a cool idea to do a little comparative analysis on stuff like that.
Yep, I love doing side-by-side tests. I mean, we always got to be comparing, always got to be testing. I mean, if anything else, it's just fun to see what the deer prefer.
Clint, you mentioned doing a side-by-side test. How is it that you're going to gauge the success or failure of one or the other, just simply by your observation?
No, I've actually done this a few times before, and I just use what are called utilization cages. Basically, just think of it like a great big tomato cage, essentially, and just stake it to the ground out there. And you can literally see a difference in browse height if you just keep them out of it in a certain little circular spot about, 3 feet, 4 feet around. If they can't get in there and stick their nose through it, you can see a huge difference in browse height in between species like that. And we've done that before just for fun, like for around our alfalfa fields along the edges, just to give you an idea. Wow, these deer really are grazing this a lot heavier than you would think. Just throw a utilization cage out there. It's simple to make, and it can really give you a kind of a yardstick thumb rule on, wow, this really is working, or no, it's not.
Cool. Is that what you do as well, Wes? I don't know if that's a controlled environment is what you'd want, but cool.
Yep, it is. That's basically the same thing.
So let's get back to what we originally started talking about for just a minute, because I'm curious to see how it's going to change the way that either of you hunt.
Yeah, as far as when it comes to
strategy,
when it comes to my sure. I don't know about you guys, but I feel like this year, with as late of a planting dates that our ag in general around got planted. One of the things I'm going to try and key in on is standing corn that still is available come season, because most of the time in October 1st, and here and where Wesley and I are at, most of our corn is gone. Field corn is gone by the time October 1st rolls around. And if you can find standing corn and you have some intel on a buck that's still using an inside corner of the standing cornfield to get to maybe a bean plot or what have you, then I'll use that standing corn to get in tight on them. And that corn gives me plenty of cover to get in and out without being seen. I can do a lot of hanging hunts that way and really crowd them. And then on the flip side of that, when we're looking at beans, I planted those Gen 2 beans late enough that it should be the last green beans in the countryside around where I've planted them. That's kind of the benefit of not getting them in early. So I want to still see some utilization of those green beans early in the year. So I'm going to try and crowd over those a bit, maybe.
Gotcha.
For me, I would say these weather conditions, how it's going to affect my strategy is there's just a lot more late planted beans than normal. So, I mean, I moved this year, so I'm in a different area, but hopefully by season I'll have permission to 10, 12 different properties. And I'm certainly going to be keying on landowners that have late planted beans, because in previous years I may have permission to one property that has a late planted bean source. But this year, if things go well, I mean, hopefully there's just a lot more late planted beans in the area. And I mean, doing some summertime scouting, I mean, walking in, going through a cornfield, driving around in the evenings, there's going to be a lot of late planted beans where bucks are still hitting I don't know if they'll still be green or not, but we'll be hitting those late planted beans. And like Clint mentioned, using the corn to our advantage, because hopefully it's still standing. I wouldn't be surprised if I'm sitting in standing corn on the ground multiple times here in the first week of October.
Yeah, absolutely.
I would agree with you.
Yeah, I mentioned you mentioned that standing corn too. One of the things I did in the first part of July was walk a couple of these cornfields that I know I've got some target bucks around. And I've actually found several big drowned out spots in that standing corn that legitimately, with the proper wind, you could ambush one in some of those open drowned spots if they're traveling through there. And you know, it's kind of guesswork, but you could pack a little stool on your back and just go in there and sit and bushwhack one.
Yep. I think for me as well, Jason, is I've probably this year used trail cameras less than I have in previous years. And that's simply because, I've been able to find these late planted bean sources, walk in standing corn, video deer, and I don't want to use I want my trail cameras to be helping me, not hurting me. And if I can know that a buck is in a certain area, I don't want to go in right into where, I don't want to crowd him too much and bump him. If I know he's there and I've got video of him, that's good enough for me. I'm not going to use my trail camera to make the situation worse than it might be. Does that make sense?
It does. Absolutely. 100%. Let me ask you a question that would have played into the couple of podcasts that Clint and I recorded earlier. What are you going to do to verify, as Clint would term it, proof of life after that magical time when they lose their velvet and, around the 1st of September, 15th of September, whatever the case may be? What are you going to do to figure that out?
Probably the same thing that I've been doing here the last few weeks. And that's, when Clint or myself or you, whenever somebody's doing summertime scouting with a video camera, I'm still checking the wind. I'm still, I'm not necessarily taking a scentless shower or anything. I'm not trying to get 40 yards away from him from a bow shot. I'm just trying to get to where I think that bachelor group's going to be 150 yards away, and I can get a video camera on him. So it's not like I got to be right on top of him. But I'm still, making sure I'm almost hunting that deer. I get an adrenaline rush when I got that deer in the bean field and looking at him through the video camera. And I'll still be doing that in September. When the velvet does come off, I'm sure there'll be deer shifting. I'm sure there'll be deer moving around. But like I said, because of the late planted beans, I think there's opportunity for those bucks to hold to those summer patterns maybe just a little bit longer than they normally would. At least that's what I'm hoping for.
So, Clint, let me ask you this, because you're a veterinarian and you know everything.
Right.
So does
right.
Wes's the magic question here is, does Wes's logic does that work? Because one has to ask the question. Hold on. Does it work? Because they're still going to go through this normal transformation that they go through when they get all weird, and freaked out, and testosterone
breaking up,
right. Bachelor groups breaking up. They're going to become arguably a whole lot less predictable. Certainly not as predictable as they were 10 days before they lost it, or 20 days.
Right.
Is it going to be still the same thing that we've always experienced, or obviously there's a case to be made for. No, it's not going to be the same. It's going to be different. The food source is going to be different. Is that going to hold true? I guess is what I'm saying.
Yeah, on a clinical aspect, that definitely holds water, and it has less to do really with the hormonal shifts that drive the quote shift,
Gotcha.
and more about and more about the nutritive value of the food that's out in front of them. And we use a term in nutrition, and Wesley knows it probably better than I do. They call it TDN, or total digestible nutrients. And so when a plant matures, whether we're talking beans, corn, or weeds out in the timber like greenbrier or what have you, when a plant matures and it gets, quote, over the hill, it becomes less nutritive, and the total digestible nutrients of that plant drops because it's woody and over mature. So that theory of bean utilization early holds true if the TDN of those plants are still green and palatable versus shifted to brown. And since those guys are ruminants, they're going to select for those plants that still have a higher TDN value. Now, you still may see some shifting going on, but I think Wesley's on point there. You still may get some quote-unquote summer use as early as opening day in October for us.
And they may not be coming to that food source in the bachelor group of $7 all at once together, and from the same corner of the field they were. Maybe, right. I mean, obviously they'll be broken up by then, maybe accessing the field from a different point, but hopefully from a guy that's willing to do some homework and some long-range scouting, figure out, okay, that buck he still is using this food source, but he tends to be in this part of the field most of the time instead of where that bachelor group came out in the summer. And so that's where there might be an opportunity.
That holds water. Yeah, I think it absolutely holds water. And I've been doing this like both of you guys have, diving into these secluded little bean fields over the last couple weeks, sitting back with a camera on a pod or a spotting scope on a tripod and, getting that classic, beautiful velvet footage that we all love, but checking the wind, make sure you're not just doing no harm. And I've actually, the same way you talked about your trail cameras, on farms that I've identified proof of life, I've just absolutely backed out of there, made a miniature target list for that section. And I love that idea of diving back in there in September and doing the exact same thing about 2 weeks pre-season and see what we come up with. You may not see, like you said, you may not see those 7 to 14 bucks out in that same field, but it's all about identifying who's still there and how he's using it. Right. And you could make a crush in on him early in October, I feel like.
That's the goal. So we'll see if we can make it happen, right?
We'll do it, buddy.
Exactly. It sounds easy, right? Clint, if I understand,
absolutely.
And leave it to Clint to make it sound easy. First, Clint, I wanted to thank you for TDN. Sometime in the next week, I'm definitely using that with the next landowner I meet, and we're talking about. That's priceless. TDN. All right. Anyway, I don't even remember where I was going with that. Who cares? Clint, you mentioned going back in September. Am I understanding you correctly to say that you're going to go back in September with trail cameras just to verify that they're still there?
Probably more long-range observation. Yeah, I'll typically, sometimes in situations like that, I might hang like what I would consider a high-value observation stand. Like I might get lucky and kill him out of it, but I'm more so there just to watch. Gotcha. Especially if I'm crowding that opening day date. And then I can, make my adjustment in the first 3 days of the season or what have you and slide in. And I like the idea of crowding the bean field. I feel like a drawback to hunting over a bean field. I absolutely hate trying to sneak out of a standing bean field after dark. It is miserable, awful. You sound like a herd of elephants walking through there trying to be quiet, and you can really do more harm than good if your access is not bulletproof around standing beans. Standing corn is super forgiving. You can crowd those suckers super tight and just ninja slip down through the corn. Nobody's none the wiser. But if you don't have a good access route out of the bean field that you're trying to hunt over or near, man, you can wreck things in a couple of nights. You send does scattering across the countryside. It sounds like a herd of buffalo running through those beans.
Yep. I think I'm actually gonna.
Go ahead, Wes.
I think I'm actually this year gonna try out something I haven't done before, and that's I know Ben Massey's a White Knuckle Productions guy, and after talking with him a little bit, I think I'm gonna take a saddle to the woods and try to be a little more mobile. And like I said, I'll probably end up sitting on the ground some. Could be in standing crops in the first week of October, but just figuring out long range what that deer is doing, and if I don't have a stand there already right now, not being worried about it, because I'll use the saddle to get where I need to be.
Makes complete sense. Well, I often struggle with whether or not to hunt over a field, and I certainly have access to a ton of field, and I'm just super lucky in that my entire lease really has just a ton of top access. But that top access is all field, so the only part of that concerns me is, like Clint just said, how much damage do you really do by walking out, once? It's really hard to quantify because you don't know how many deer are going to be out there. Maybe there's nothing out there and you get lucky, but you don't. Once it's too late, it's too late. The damage is done. Do you guys have a rule of thumb that you use before you go in on an open field like that?
It's whether or not I can sneak out. Yeah, if the buck that's there that I'm trying to target is giving me a good look, and I know I can maybe run down a sprayer track in the field or a waterway or something that hides me better than just traipsing out across the standing bean field, I'm going to try and cram it down his throat. But if my access out of there is sketchy at best, I like Wes's idea of going just super mobile, sitting on the ground, packing a chair in, throwing a hanging hunt setup, just doing something kind of off the wall in those spots. And I almost consider spots like this, quote unquote, burner spots. I may not get him, and I may blow it up and I may trash the place. But if you don't do something weird and try it, you may never get a crack at him come November.
If it doesn't have bulletproof access where I can get in and out clean, I've had my wife or somebody in a vehicle or a Ranger pull in on a farm lane or something and bust deer out of that field and come within 20 yards of my stand, and instead of a walking person bust those deer out, have something that, if deer used to be bumped out by farm equipment or vehicles or whatever, just instead of them getting bumped off that food source from a walking person, use something else like that they're a little more used to get them out of there if I want to come back to it.
Gotcha. Okay. Makes sense.
Yeah, that's a great tactic. We'll do the same exact. If you're trapped, I'll send the wife a message. Need a bump.
Yeah, exactly.
Come bouncing along in her grocery getter or something and scatter them, and then I'm out.
Yep.
And that's a great.
And that's plenty of time.
That's the best way to do it, without alerting them. I think if I had the opportunity, and I think you guys would agree, I would do that every time I went and hunted one of those fields, regardless of whether there was something out there or not. I would just plan to have somebody pick me up if I could.
Unless if you've got good enough access, like Clint's talking about, where you can get in and out in corn or using a creek or something where you don't have. I'd rather not bump them at all. I'd rather the vehicle not have to come. But if you have to, then like I said, I'd rather it be something with four wheels instead of two legs.
Right.
Yeah,
exactly.
and I've actually had scenarios. I've had scenarios like this where, we can't do a bump off, and I've got, a shooter out in the field, and I know he's the one I definitely don't want to bump, instead of trying to get out, I'll slip out through the middle of the tent. I'll cut right back through his bedding area and try and go out another direction. I mean, if he's the one that I don't want to booger, I'll slide right through it. There's caveats to it, no doubt, but I absolutely don't want him to make me at dark. I mean, that's just a terrible idea. And I feel like sometimes if I can slip down through there and maybe not scatter him and actually have him visualize me, I think I can get away with that. But that may be more aggressive, but it's worked well for me in the past, but there's definitely cons to it as well.
Deer definitely individuals, and I mean are more. I mean, some deer bump one time and they're halfway across the county, and another deer are just a little more forgiving. And obviously depends on where you're hunting and the pressure, and I mean a million other different factors. I mean, I've bumped some bucks and never seen them again, but there's been others that you bump, and then a couple days later he's in that same food source right where he saw you walking out. So it's kind of a buck by buck basis, but I totally agree with you, Clint, on doing everything you can to stay clear of him.
One of the things that I was going to ask you guys is what have you seen out of the ordinary in terms of a plot screen? I've thought about using round bales and stacking them up along, like, say, a 2-track or something like that, so that you've got at least some cover getting out of there. Have you guys used anything other than, again, planting a plot screen? And I've got a question about plot screens here in just a second, but have you guys seen anything else used? Like a line of semi-trailers?
I've actually done the exact same. Those storage containers, just line them up.
Right. Yeah, exactly. I got a deal on them, honey.
Yeah, right. I've actually done, Jason, exactly what you've talked about, kind of depending on plot size and where I'm hunting. But I've taken a bunch of old scrap, like round straw bales, and stacked them in a row like that. If it's a spot where I know I can get away with it and I don't have, like you said, a screen planted, that works out pretty well. And sometimes you can actually play that to your advantage and pull one of those bales out. And if you need to, slap a ground blind in the middle of all of them. And that's actually worked pretty well for me in the past.
I'm right there with you guys. I've used hay bales, but haven't used anything else. I definitely haven't bought any storage containers yet, but I'll have to put that one in my bag of tricks.
You heard it here first on the White Knuckle podcast. Storage containers are the new secret weapon.
Barriers.
We are
breaking barriers.
We're helping.
You're not pro staff unless you use a storage container.
Well, yeah, we're going to get a sponsorship with pods. And I think they're going to give each team member like 40 of them, and a forklift to move them around with, an all-terrain forklift.
I'm down with that.
Great deal. Yeah, right. What about you, Wes? You want me to send you some?
Yeah, a couple hundred, please.
Right.
I got a couple long walks to the stand. I may need a bunch.
The whole way. Well, hell, let's make a tunnel. We might just as well, weld them all together while we're at it.
Go right through them, yeah.
Yeah, just go El Chapo and go underground, man.
There you go.
There you go.
Oh boy, we could go 100 different directions. Well, hey, one of the things that before we let you go, we've already burned up 47 minutes of you guys' time, and I appreciate it. When is it too late to plant, Egyptian wheat, plot screen, whatever, someone's going to try and plant for a plot screen? When's it too late to plant that?
I've definitely never planted one in the fall before. I've got a couple planted right now that are head high or if not taller. I probably personally wouldn't be trying to plant a plot screen after, first couple of weeks of July. At this point, if you planted one, I really, truly just don't know how tall it would get. It might get tall enough that you would you'd be able to crawl out of there. I mean, if you're a really good farmer and have the agriculture know-how like Clint does, maybe you'd get it chest high or head high. But I personally can't really speak to planting any fall screens.
So challenge accepted. I'm gonna plan it next weekend and see if I can belly crawl out September 15th and
how tall survive. Are you?
6'4", 5.
Yeah, no, that's not going to work.
Well, you're betting against me already.
Oh, no, not happening. Wes, let me ask you about that, Wes, real quick. About so I've toyed around with the idea of using some of the real world products for screening purposes or cover purposes, and I don't know much about planting those type of plants. It's not something that we do on the farm.
Yep.
Walk me through that. When is the best time to put in some of that bedding in a bag, or something that's got big, tall grass plants in it like that? I've seen guys do it going in March, April, spring green up, doing frost seeding. Walk me through that process.
Sure. This might be a good time, Clint, to mention. I mean, we sell switchgrass and bedding in a bag, but we are certainly willing. One thing that sets us apart from a lot of other seed companies is we want to be people's sole seed supplier. And what I mean by that is if they've got a custom screen mixture that right now we don't offer an annual screen mixture, and they want to put together some sorghum, Egyptian weed, and sun hemp, or I don't know. I mean, if they want to put together a screen mixture, call me up and I got some suggestions. I mean, that's something I'm planting right now is a couple different screen mixtures, and we can help you out with that.
Cool.
So is it best to start those projects as early as you can in the spring?
The same time you're planting beans, I'd be thinking about planting your screen mixture as well.
I see.
I don't think that there's any downfall to, I obviously don't want to be planting too early, but if you're planting those in May, I planted several of mine in late May and early June. They look really good right now. They're going to be serving their purpose well into the hunting season.
Cool. Do you use them a lot? Is it a must on every one of your food plots, Wes?
Totally situational. I've definitely got some food plots that I can get in and get out, clean access, don't need them. But if, there's probably a dozen different reasons why a guy might need a screen. One of my screens doesn't have anything to do with access at all, but because I feel like that soybean plot gets more utilization out of it when it's blocked from the road. And I'm just using that screen so that, and it's not even a heavily used country road, but as a car goes by and a deer that's standing 3-4 foot tall puts its head up, instead of seeing that car go by, that car can't see them and the deer can't see the car. And that just, I feel like, makes the deer more comfortable using that plot.
That's a good point. That's all. Yeah, that's a phenomenal point that I wouldn't even consider is just using it to block, you know how we all do this, whether it's me, you, or Jason, we all do this. We're driving down a gravel road and we see a pile of deer out in a standing bean field about 400 yards away, and you wear your brakes out all summer long, slamming them. They'll eyeball you and they will flee eventually. And that's a great point.
Yeah. There's a lot of different reasons why you might be using the screen, but get a little creative and plan it. See what happens.
I've got a couple places that I'll ride by frequently. You guys may have seen some pictures recently on social media that have just some slammers in them, and they've got that place pretty well sewn up so that there's only a couple holes that you can get through, and those deer, you can tell by the pictures that I take that they don't generally get too freaked out because by and large they're not seeing the people on the road very much, and the people on the road aren't seeing them. But I've got a unique situation in Southwest Wisconsin where I'm at, where I think only maybe a fifth at best of the fields that I'm hunting are even seen by the road. They're just so far back off the road, or they're down in a valley, that kind of stuff. So I don't run into that very often. The trouble that I run into, everybody talks about top access, but in the evenings when your thermals are pulling down like that, it's going to go down that valley, and that's where the deer are. So there's always like what's the lesser of two evils, So it's it can be a tricky web to weave, but. I got one. I think I sent it to you today, didn't I, Clint? Or a couple days ago? Did I send you that one?
Oh, yeah.
I'll send it to Wes, too. I finally got one that got my complete attention. So I'm pretty jacked about that. And I actually got a picture of him today walking across real world Clover at 2:00 in the afternoon. He was out there feeding.
Awesome.
But I've got it in. I've got that food plot in a just a secluded, like, good Lord, it's got to be 3/4 of a mile off the road. Even if you were a half a mile off the road, you still wouldn't be able to see where it is. So he clearly feels comfortable in there, and I've got 3 pictures of him now. He just showed up. Hopefully he sticks. We'll see once I can start the 14th, 15th of September. So. That'll make things even more interesting. Unfortunately for me, there's no beans there this year. Clint, you and I talked about that earlier this year. There's not beans there like there is normally, but they planted alfalfa with I don't know what kind of peas, but they cut it and they just blew it up in the silo, and now there's alfalfa growing out there. So that'll be good.
Oh yeah, that'll be great. September. We see a lot of utilization. We still on the dairy here. We still have quite a bit of alfalfa, and we'll see bucks hammer that alfalfa all the way up until it gets frostbitten and turn brown after the first frost. And man, when you've got your opener early, you ought to be able to, if you play your cards right. That is a super viable option to still get on some of those early bucks that are still hammering that alfalfa on their summer patterns. I would consider.
Right.
Wouldn't it be nice to be in the state with the September 1 opener?
Well, hey, I can put you guys on some deer. You just show up.
That September opener is a pretty nice thing to have.
I've capitalized on it once, with a really good deer. So it's there's probably 40, 50 acres of alfalfa. Well, maybe not that much. Who knows? I'm bad at math. It's a good thing I got out of the car business. But there's a lot. Let's put it that way. So there's got to be a mile of fence line, let's call it, around that alfalfa. So it's just going to be a matter of doing what you guys were talking about. Trail cameras are great and they're a great tool, but I think at the end of the day, the real value, the currency and all that is really that intel that you get from sitting out there and watching them. Wouldn't you guys agree?
Yeah, definitely. Like when we see the question, if I'm going to deploy a camera or a series of them is, a lot of times I'll ask, well, can I see it or can I not see it? And if I've got to hike there to see it, I'm probably still going to hike there and observe if I can get in and out clean. But then there's areas where I'll use cameras that I absolutely can't see it. I know I'm doing way more harm than good trying to get there. And again, like Wesley said, super situational. That's when I'm going to use those cameras to be my eyes in the woods when I don't have to disturb them as much, versus those long range scouts and those hikes in. And I love that tactic, whether it's during the season or like now when we're putting our target lists together. Those long range walks are great, And if you don't need a camera, then why bother? You're liable to be doing more harm than good with it.
I think the factor of bait has a big thing to do with it. I mean, I come from Indiana, where you can bait during the off season, and so I mean, a lot of times my inventory will go from a mineral station in the summer to okay, now it's fall. I'm transitioning to scrapes, and then after scrape activity starts winding down and hunting season's closing, I'm going back to a corn pile. And so I've always got heavy activity in front of that camera location. And if you're in a state that doesn't allow any kind of baiting like Illinois does, that changes your strategy just as much as if you're in a state like Kansas or Ohio, where they allow season-long baiting. That definitely, to me, would affect my decision on when and when not to put out that trail camera. Because when you're baiting in Kansas or Ohio, you're not changing any factors from the summer to the fall to the winter. Whereas if you're in a state like Indiana, you're taking away a factor. You're just throwing another reason why they wouldn't come to that location. But if you're in a state like Illinois, maybe using less trail cameras and a little more scouting, like Clint and I are talking about, and making sure your trail cameras aren't hurting you.
Right.
Just a thought.
That's a good point. Any final thoughts on what was our topic for the evening, and that's how this funky weather pattern that we've been in all year and all the rain is going to affect what you're doing opening day? Any final thoughts?
Oh, yeah. I just think that if you look at it as a broad-reaching overview, I just feel like the more adaptable you are and the more mobile you are, the more likely you are to be able to take advantage and kill early. I feel like looking at what we've got now set up isn't necessarily a bad thing. I feel like everybody thinks of the woe is me. Oh my gosh, this bean field is planted in weeds or they may go to cover crop and blah, blah, blah. Just don't make excuses. Just go get it. Adapt and change and just do your best. Get in and mix it up with them.
Get after it, in other words.
I think Clint nailed it on the head. I think Clint nailed it on the head with the word adapt. I mean, a guy that's willing to look at his situation or what's in the countryside around him and say, oh, they replanted beans in that cornfield and now there's an edge there. Or, oh, they're not, they didn't put anything into that wheat field. Maybe I should see if I can put in a food plot. Or those are 4 foot tall weeds. Maybe I should contact the farmer and see if he'd be willing to leave a back stretch along the woods with 4 foot tall weeds. I mean, just getting creative with your strategies and just adapting a little bit is going to make a big difference.
Well, there you have it. My conversation with Wes and Clint about all things early season. It's definitely going to be a challenging early season. It's going to be one like I don't know that I've ever hunted before. But I think, like the guy said, if we adapt, we should be able to capitalize on the situation. So that said, I'll begin to close out the show for today. If anyone has an idea for the show, please don't hesitate to email me, jason@whiteknuckleproductions.com. You can also reach out to Clint on social media, and we'd be more than happy to try and accommodate anyone's ideas. I think coming up here, we're going to talk to some saddle hunting people. We're going to wrap a little bit about what we've seen so far with our trail cameras and how we're going to go ahead and utilize that information to best serve our needs, I guess. So, hey, I just want to remind everybody, Ozonics has a brand new unit out, the Orion. It's available on their site, www.ozonicshunting.com. You can go there and pick out a new Orion if you're looking for the brand new unit. Otherwise, everything else is still also at their online store, being that they're manufacturer ship direct. So thank you very much to Ozonics for making this podcast happen. Thanks to you guys, our listeners and gals. We appreciate everything, and more than anything, we appreciate the nice comments and love that we get from you. If you haven't done so, please go on iTunes and give us a review. It would greatly help us, and it would also help make our job a little bit easier in putting this show on. So
I think that's about all I've got for this week. Jason out.